Cool, just started. So the main idea, thanks, Ricky. The main idea of this is we've been talking a lot about the roots of democracy leading up to the election and thinking about this question of what should democracy look like. And while last time we talked about what it should look like and what principles they should have and maybe how the Constitution did and didn't do some of these, today we need to talk about how people have actively attempted to make sure that people don't have the right to vote. So the big question today is, how have states attempted to stop people from voting, and why, and what groups are affected by this? So I'll give you, about a minute to write down the essential question. And trust me, this is a kind of lesson that you guys would normally get in May. But because of the election and because of what's been going on, you're getting it now. All right, I'll give you another 40 seconds to write this down. And while you guys are getting a piece of paper and pencils and writing this down, I'll need more goldfish. More seconds. All right, let me stop recording real fast. So before we start, there's a couple words we need to think about. The first one is disenfranchised. So disenfranchised means you can't vote or don't have political power. Don't worry about the litigation. I completely forgot to use it throughout the presentation, so just don't worry about that one. But disenfranchised, please write this down. This is a friendly definition for disenfranchised. My throat's going to be sore by the end of the day. All right, cool. For Emily and Jaden, please get out a piece of some notebook paper and pencil or pen. Hopefully you can take notes throughout this. And if not, I have I'm going to record it and put it up on YouTube after. Cool. All right, so this is the main word we're going to use today. It's called disenfranchised. It means you don't have political power or can't vote. And we're going to look at how people had been disenfranchised from the beginning and then how they became disenfranchised through voter suppression. So before we start, I want to start with this quote from John Lewis. It says, "Democracy is not a state." For those who don't know who John Lewis is, he's one of the people that marched in the civil rights movement. He became a senator for the last basically 30 years, marched with Martin Luther King, definitely American civil rights hero. So he said, democracy is not a state, it's an act. And each generation must do its part to help build what we call the beloved community, a nation and world society at peace with itself. So basically, democracy changes, and it's each generation's job to help build it and make it more equal. So we have a better democracy we leave it with a better democracy than what we started with. You're back, okay, cool. So here's basically, I forgot to animate one little part. So we start off with the Constitution. And in the beginning, the only eligible voters were white male landowners. So basically, if you're rich, a rich white man, or if you're a farmer. These are basically the only two groups of people that are allowed to vote in the beginning when the Constitution's made. Everybody else, women, African Americans, etc., were not allowed to vote. They were disenfranchised. So the only real part I want you to write down right now is the only people able to vote were white male landowners. That is the only thing you really need to, that's like the main part I want you to get from this. I'll give you 30 seconds to write that down, and then I'll play the video. I love when I get to play Family Guy in class. It doesn't happen very often. But when it does, it's always nice. Here we go.
Eventually, after many months at sea, Griffin Peterson and his shipmates finally reached the New World.
I declare this land Quahog.
This place is nothing but a wilderness. What are we gonna do?
We're gonna build a new settlement. We'll have a happy new life, and we'll have equal rights for all. Except blacks, Asians, Hispanics, Jews, gays, women, Muslims. Everybody who's not a white man. And I mean white. So no Italians, no Polish, just people from Ireland, England, and Scotland. But only certain parts of Scotland and Ireland. Just full-blooded whites. No, you know what? Not even whites. Nobody gets any rights. America.
There we go. But yeah, that's honestly like a good depiction of it. Very percentage-wise, very few Americans were able to vote at the beginning. They were disenfranchised. I need to make this full screen again. So a lot of Americans were disenfranchised at the beginning. And then things started to change in 1828. So in 1828, you have President Andrew Jackson lead a movement to give the common man the right to vote. So basically, that whole landowning part, let's get rid of that. So a lot of states passed new laws that helped the common man vote. And for a common man, what that means is they were white and they were male and they were over 21. So yes, now we have basically, instead of having 12% of the population vote, now you have about 35% of the population. So, hey, it's not great, but it's getting there. So, and we will cover this. I'm going to kind of go through this because we're going to cover this later on. But basically, that whole landowning portion gets taken out. So moving on, we then have post-Civil War. So after the Civil War, which was fought over slavery, Ulysses S. Grant is president. And one of the things they do is they pass the 15th Amendment, which affects voting in the South. So basically, it helped. Sorry, I straight up lifted this slide off of the post-Civil War stuff, so some of this we haven't gotten to yet. But the long story short is the 15th Amendment basically gives all men the right to vote. So it basically gives the right to vote to African Americans and all men in the United States. So you cannot be denied the vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude, meaning slavery. So this gave Black men the right to vote. Sorry, women. We'll get there. For 50 years down the road, we'll get there. It was actually a really big part of contention. A lot of white women didn't want this to pass because it didn't include women in it, which led to some contention, but we'll get to that later in the year. So 15th Amendment, big idea is right to vote for all men. Okay, and the results of this were really good. You started, because Black men were allowed to vote, you started to see a lot of Black men elected into office. You started to see African Americans in Congress, and Congress is the one that writes laws. Of the 16 in Congress, 14 of them were in the House of Representatives, and 2 were in the Senate. So those are your federal positions. And then as far as state positions, a lot of Black men become governors and treasurers and militia officers, and a lot of them hold state jobs that are elected. So you start to see some really good things happen from this until the South does what it does best. Until the South strikes back, basically. A lot of white elites in the South did not like that their former slaves were now becoming elected and having political power. Another huge reason they didn't like this is because there was a lot of Black people in the South. So they were making these changes and kind of outnumbering them. So what happens is you have Southern and Midwestern whites basically doing everything in their power to stop African Americans from voting through voter suppression. A lot of the old white people that did own slaves, that were very politically powerful, tried their best to stop African Americans from voting. So they basically tried to undo all the good that came from the 15th Amendment. So this kind of stuff, so their goal is to disenfranchise African Americans and keep things in the South the same as the way they were before the Civil War. And we'll really get into this when we start doing the South and the Civil War, the pre-Civil War stuff. So I will give you a second to write this down. It'll take about a minute or so. All right. Type done in chat when you're done writing. Are you actually done, or are you just saying you're done? And like I said, I'm definitely going to be having this. I'm definitely going to be putting this up on YouTube as well, so you guys can rewatch it. Done, 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 done. All right. Cool. Changing the slide in 3, 2, 1. All right. So how did they suppress the vote then? So what did they do to suppress Black people from voting at this time? Different methods they used were literacy tests, quote unquote. And what they were made to be intentionally difficult and subjective for the grader. So for the poll worker. So what would happen is if you were a white person, you'd go up to vote. They would give you a copy of, See Spot Run, and they'd give you a super easy literacy test. That's like, what's your ABCs? Okay, good, you can vote. If you were Black and you came to the polls and you came up to the polls, they would give you a very, very difficult literacy test. That was like intentionally incredibly hard so that you would fail and not be able to vote. This also added on to the whole segregated schools aspect in the southern states and Midwestern and northern states too, where the schools were a lot more underfunded. They didn't have as many teachers. They didn't have as many books. So their reading scores were a lot lower as well. Another thing they did was poll taxes. So basically once a year, you would pay a poll tax that you had to pay to vote. And during this time, a lot of Black families were having a very difficult time making ends meet because there wasn't much job opportunities after the Civil War for Black families. And this was intentionally done by rich Southern whites, intentionally created so that they wouldn't have many lucrative job offers and not be able to pay things like poll taxes. So definitely it's very intentional. So here are, I know a lot of you are writing right now, but here is an example of what a poll tax looked like. So they would say, hey, pay your tax before January 31st, protect, and this is what you'd have to pay. It wouldn't be that much, but if you're poor and you're already having trouble making ends meet, you're not going to pay extra money to sign up to vote when there's all these restrictions already on you. So I will give you, minute, 45 seconds to write down stuff about literacy tests and poll taxes. When you're done, type done in chat or comment your favorite flavor of goldfish. All right, 2 of you, 3 of you, 4 of you, 5. 6. Another 30 seconds. And I guess if you're watching this on YouTube, you can just kind of skip a little bit past these. I have not tried baking goldfish, but that sounds absolutely delicious. I would love to try those. Okay, never mind then. I mean, the idea doesn't sound bad. I have some bacon grease in my fridge. Maybe I'll put that in the pan, melt it up, and put some goldfish in it, toss it around a little bit, see if it tastes good. It might. That also might be my little fat boy voice, my fat boy voice speaking. Nasty. All right, cool. So this came out a lot better when I wasn't presenting, but basically this is an example of a literacy test. And they would intentionally create questions that were misleading. So the first one says, draw a line around the number or letter of this sentence. And then, so if you're a white person and you drew a line, basically around anything, the poll worker would be like, yes, you can understand the instructions. But if you're a black person, they would be like, oh, you did the wrong letter. Sorry, you failed the literacy test. So they would intentionally create these questions to be like weird or difficult or not make any sense. This was on purpose. So they could subjectively not let black people vote. All right, cool. So other things they did was intimidation. So what would happen is that KKK members or police officers would stand outside polls and watch who voted. Now, back then in 1875, 1880, there was a lot of overlap between these two groups. So if it was very intimidating and scary to vote if you were not approved or voting for the parties of these two people. So we will take a look at what that looks like.
Election day, ain't it?
Sure is.
John Brown's body lies a-moldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-moldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a-moldering in the grave. His truth is marching on. He's gonna be a soldier in the army of the Lord. He's gonna be a soldier in the army of the Lord. His truth is marching on.
We like Republican tickets.
We ain't got those yet.
Really fast. Back then in the 1800s, Republicans were the Northern Party and Democrats were the Southern Party. This flipped 180. This like went 180 degrees and flipped around 1964 due to the Civil Rights Movement. So now you tend to have Democrats in the North and Republicans more in the South. But back then it was the opposite.
Just the Democrat tickets.
We'll wait.
Might be a pretty long wait.
Let me explain something to you. These men are here to vote. And they mind dying a whole lot less than you do.
Let's see if I can find any.
So like think about how scary it is for these guys to come and vote when you're greeted by all these dudes with guns in the polling election, like in the poll, watching you vote, watching how you vote. Even if you're a Southern white, if you voted for the Republican Party back then, which used to be the party that was against slavery, and used to be the party of the North in big cities, if you voted for them, everyone watched you do that. And they are standing there with their guns, keeping track of who is voting. And if you vote in a way that they don't like, you may receive some visitors that night or in the future. Visitors wearing white hoods. If you're basically the KKK would basically pay you an unfriendly visit. So it's like very scary to have intimidation. Other ways that they would do voter suppression is they would have less voting centers in large Black areas. And this is an example more of how it worked in the North. It's not just the evil South doing this. Whites in the North also did this if they knew that they would not get the Black vote. So it is not just, Southern whites, it's a lot of people. The other thing they did was a lot of states decided, hey, felons can't vote. Let's take away the right for people that are felons to vote. This hits the Black community very hard because they had during this time something called the Black Codes, which basically made it very, very easy for Black people to get arrested for really silly things. Like you can be arrested for being unemployed. You could be arrested for walking on the wrong side of the sidewalk and be declared a felon back then. Like it was, okay, that's a little far, but or like loitering. They intentionally made it very easy for Black people to be arrested for very silly things and lose the right to vote. So here's an example of a more recent story of voter suppression.
I went there for 2 years with a minister named Reverend J.J. Simmons. The white men, they would not let us register to vote. They would sit there. They had tables, and they would be playing dominoes. I didn't even know how to play dominoes. But do you know I learned to play standing there watching them? They would ask you silly questions like this man, I never will forget his name, Mr. Cox. He was chair of the board of registrars. He asked me, how many black jelly beans in a jar? How many red ones in there? And I told him, you don't know how many jelly beans. He told me to shut my black mouth. Shut up. Well, the next Monday, I told Reverend Simmons that I was not going back. I said, because I'm not going to be embarrassed like that anymore. He said, you want to vote, don't you? I said, yes. He said, we're going to go until the building falls down. So we're going to be there every time they open that door. He said, now in the morning, I'll be by to pick you up. You going? And that is the day Mr. Cox asked me to recite part of the preamble to the Constitution. I don't really think he knew, but I recited it. He said, you're going to pass today because we are tired of looking at your black faces. And then he gave me my slip that I was a registered voter. We did vote in the next election. It was a joy. But the thing about it is, I didn't feel it should have been this hard. I knew it shouldn't have been this hard.
So that's only 70 years ago. So that's only 70 years ago. That is not that long. That's not that long of a time ago. She's still alive. So like this isn't that long ago that this kind of stuff happened. And we know how history repeats itself. So recently the president made comments about being about wanting his supporters to be poll watchers. In a lot of this state, so we'll do that first, and then we'll look at the other stuff.
As the president battles the coronavirus, we want to look back at comments he made at the first presidential debate, which raised concerns among election officials nationwide. Last Tuesday, moderator Chris Wallace asked the president if he will commit to asking his supporters to avoid civil unrest this November. He also asked Mr. Trump if he is willing not to declare victory until the election results have been certified. Here's how the president responded.
I'm urging my supporters to go into the polls and watch very carefully because that's what has to happen. I am urging them to do it. As you know, today there was a big problem. In Philadelphia, they went in to watch. They were called poll watchers, a very safe, very nice thing. They were thrown out. They weren't allowed to watch. You know why? Because bad things happen in Philadelphia, bad things. And I am urging I am urging my people. I hope it's going to be a fair election. If it's a fair
You're urging
election,
them what?
I am 100% on board. But if I see tens of thousands of ballots being manipulated, I can't go along with that. And I'll tell you what.
As always, we remind our viewers there's no evidence to support the president's claims that ballots are being manipulated. While poll watchers do exist and are necessary, they must follow certain rules and regulations. That wasn't the case in Philadelphia, as the president falsely claimed. Additionally, by encouraging his supporters to watch for alleged fraud in this unofficial capacity, the president is actually suggesting they commit a federal crime. It is illegal in every state for a civilian to loiter near a polling place or attempt in any way to intimidate voters. For more on voting, the black...
We're gonna stop it there. But yeah, that's kind of the what a lot of people are very scared about when they saw that, is that a lot of them had flashbacks to this video where you had people watching who goes in and watching how they vote. Now, obviously, the way we vote today is a lot more private than literally putting your vote in a jar in front of the poll workers and everyone watching. But because of stuff like this that happened, 100 years ago, things like randomly hanging around the polling station to watch who votes is now illegal. But a lot of these states that regularly practiced and encouraged voter suppression back then still have issues with it today, and that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today. So this is
of
Georgia.
all people to have trouble voting today, it happened to Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams got a absentee ballot, and the Guardian is reporting Abrams said she had requested her absentee ballot in May, but was unable to vote with it because the return envelope arrived sealed shut. After unsuccessfully trying to steam it open, she said she went to vote in person on Tuesday. So even with the mail-in votes, there could be a problem there too.
It is. It's been a colossal disaster. The Secretary of State should be held accountable. There's no reason. My nephew went to early vote on Friday. He stayed in line for 6 hours. Nakima Williams, who is a state senator, actually sat in line with her husband for over 5 hours. It is unconscionable what happened. Matter of fact, this election has been moved twice. And so there was more time given and the new machines. So here we are. We have new machines and we're still seeing the same old problems. Something is awry.
Is there anything the government of the city of Atlanta can do?
Well, some of the places where I live right outside of Atlanta in a county. And so they're really responsible for the elections. But the Secretary of State, that's his one job. He is responsible for making sure that there's effective and efficient voting, particularly access to the ballot, particularly in light of Georgia made headlines in 2018. You would expect that they would get it right. After 2 years, not only does it seem that it hasn't gotten better, it's actually gotten worse. And so we have got to deal with this. There are major voter suppression. If we're talking about democracy is on life support right now. We've got to take this serious, and we've got to really make a core issue, fundamental issue around voter suppression and voting rights in this country.
What can you do between now and November to get a fair presidential election in Georgia?
Well, we're fighting on all kinds of levels. I think that we're going to have to sue. We're going to have to start see some lawsuits. We're going to start having to hold people accountable and put pressure on the Secretary of State and the election boards. We're going to have to start informing people and making sure that we put a demand that is not just mail-in voting, because we saw how that went, right? We can't leave that up. We need all kinds of options. We need to make sure that in the middle of a pandemic, you would think that you would want all of the polling sites open as well as mail-in ballots so that people wouldn't have to vote in a concentrated way that would really risk their lives in order to vote. This is just completely unacceptable. It's undemocratic. And what we are doing, we're prepared to fight. And there are other organizations like the New Georgia Project and 9 to 5 and others that we're coming together and we have decided that we're going to hold people accountable and that we're going to do everything we can do to really organize to prevent this from happening in November.
Can you imagine waiting 6 hours to vote when standing in the rain? That's insane. I'm not going to show this video, but I'll put this PowerPoint on Google Classroom if you want to watch it yourself. It's basically about voter suppression and like how Russia is involved with it in social media. But like 6 hour wait time. So that's maybe how it looks today. And it looks that way in big cities. So moving on, 1920, women get the right to vote. So 19th Amendment gives women the right to vote. And in the same way that they marched and they were in the streets and they fought for their rights, a lot of people also treated them violently and were against voting rights. A lot of white men that were very, I guess, very traditional, thought that it was a bad idea for women to vote. So they would say things like, lock up the suffrages, lock up the suffragists, and be very, misogynistic about women voting. The story kind of is coming to closer to an end. In 1965, civil rights movement, the Voting Rights Act gets passed, which outlaws discriminatory voting practices like hanging out at the polling station and poll taxes and literacy tests. So those get banned in 1965, but it does kind of expire recently. In 2017, the Department of Justice refused to enforce it. And in 2013, the Supreme Court kind of gutted it a little bit. So it's kind of, we kind of need it now more than ever. But anyway, here, let me stop the recording. Here is going to be